Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Quench. I am jumping straight in because we have so many great wines to show to you today. And my name's Andrea Emma Robinson, Master Sommelier. Thrilled to be able to bring you this episode on what I called, I titled it, So You Think You Know Oak. Because we've all been familiar with oak being used as a vessel for wine for really centuries now. But there's so much new going on with it, even though some of it is old ways being brought back, but being fine-tuned because we now know a whole lot more about it than we did in the past. Thanks to all the great scientists and the technicians and the practitioners out there. So we're going to be tasting this incredible array of wines that you might not always associate with oak. But to get us started, I just wanted to quickly say that if you missed the last episode, it was about summer cocktails. I called it Uncle Sam and Lady Liberty Walk Into a Bar because it was right before July 4th. And so we did some great lightened up summery cocktails and really talked about the techniques, the shaking, the stirring, rolling, all the things that you need to know and when you use them, when you don't. Super fun. I was working with my colleague and fellow sommelier, Megan Vergara, and her M Sparkling Wine. We did a wonderful version of the French 75 because we celebrate our July 4th, of course, with our French friends who are a big part of that for us, so that's a great thing. And I want you to see, though, where we are tonight because this is a gorgeous, gorgeous place. We're at Knightsbridge, and this is the view that all the people and the animals and the critters and everything get to see every single day. I'm already seeing some great thumbs up on the beauty of it alone. And we are with their incredible winemaker and friend of mine, Derek Beljoux. Did I say that right?
Yes, you said that. So the right way.
Okay, because it's a very French-sounding name, but you're a very California kid.
Yeah, that's true. It is a French turned Dutch last name.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah. And fantastic. So I wanted to do this tasting with Derek because about 18 months ago or so, they did a trade and media tasting where they were really going through some oak trials that he did. So you're going to tell us all about what that taught you or what it's still teaching you if you're still working with that. But I'm super excited to have you here because this is a beautiful place and you're making some incredible wines. And
thank you. And
you also have a background that I think it would be great to describe. You were, like me, exposed to wine in college. Yep. I think, like me, you were into food and cooking from the time that you were when you were younger.
Yep.
But from there, the similarities end because you went to college as a collegiate athlete.
Yep.
Tell me about that. Just give us the rundown.
Yeah.
And by the way, first of all, though, let's toast with your delicious Chardonnay, and we'll get all into what the details are with the wine.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, I had a pretty circuitous route into wine, very non-direct. I ended up growing up at the beach in Orange County and was mostly focused on what the waves looked like, and if there were none, then going to the skate park and being outdoors. That took me into football once I started breaking my skateboards more often than anything else. And then that ended up taking me to college, to UC Davis, which is just such a lovely university, small college town. And UC Davis signed up as a communications major. That's what they tell all the athletes to do. That's the path of least resistance. No offense to any communication majors out there.
Right, and no offense to the athletes because there's a lot of brainiacs in football for sure. You have to, especially you. I mean, you have to be pretty darn smart to keep track of all that.
Yep.
But go ahead.
So naturally, as freshmen, you look for classes that are really challenge your intellect, especially when you're looking for it. So all the football players signed up for a beer brewing class, really hard work, and you get to drink beer in class.
It's called fermentation
sciences. I thought it was beer drinking 101.
Okay.
Excuse me. But essentially, I was late to that sign up. And so the next class down was winemaking, and ended up getting that intro to viticulture that UC Davis is actually world renowned for, and just fell in love. That was the first time I was exposed to all the wine growing regions, just the passion in the class, right? A class of maybe 40 people, everybody's super engaged, asking questions. You could feel it kind of radiating.
Wow.
Versus the 400-person communications lecture hall in
Right.
which nobody is, half the class is asleep, sort of thing.
Right, right.
And then that just kind of launched me on the straight and narrow into where we are now, which is, did internships, dragged hoses, worked in the vineyard for many years, eventually landed at this beautiful family-owned estate in Knights Valley called Knightsbridge Winery.
And which I'm super excited to be at as well, because Jim and Kelly Bailey, the owners, well, first of all, they have one of the most extraordinary wine estates on the planet, and I highly recommend that if you have to plan ahead. You can't, it's private, so you have to make an appointment, but it's so well worth it. It is one of the properties that will really give you a sense for why Sonoma County and why this part of the country is so blessed for viticulture. And then the wines are extraordinary. And I will just say that Kelly and I have known each other since the 1990s, when I was at Windows on the World coordinating the wine school there, and she was at a Long Island winery called Bridgehampton. Naturally, it being the 1990s, we were 14, and they made special rules for us to allow us to work in the wine business. Just kidding. But anyway, so it's really fun to be connected with her. And I'll just do a quick turn of the camera so that everyone can wave real quick, so you guys can see that we're not alone here. And there you go. They're backlit, so they look there. All we see is your profile, but that's probably what you're happiest with. So I love the background and you went on to get your master's as well. Is that right?
Yeah. So I was I think one of the few, if not the first, that they ended up letting in the master's program from the bachelor's program with UC Davis. So yeah, graduated with a master's in viticulture and enology while playing football my last year there.
Wow.
And then ended up hopping out into Napa and Sonoma Valley shortly after that.
All right, and so just real quick, what football position?
A fullback turned tight end. So somewhere in between those two positions, I could do both of the jobs.
So you can outrun the coyotes and the mountain lions out there when necessary.
Yeah, so I got my 2 rescue pit bulls up at the winery to be able to chase them off the property.
Okay,
if
so you don't
be.
have to run like you used to then.
Exactly.
That is awesome. So let's just talk about the point of oak in wine. And it started as a practical vessel, right? So I'm just showing this image of, I think it's from Adobe stock or whatever, but
looks like a nice
oak
place.
vessels on a ship, because initially the idea was that you could roll them, you'd ship everything in them, including wine, and you could reuse them. They were liquid tight for liquid. So it started out as practical, but then it came to be seen as a contributor to style and quality. So can you just talk about why? Why does oak contribute to quality and style, generally speaking, and then we'll drill down to some of the details.
Yeah, I think so. Similar to grapes, oak kind of has its own terroir, right? It's of a certain place.
Love that you said that.
And so naturally, it coming from different forests ends up imparting sort of these different flavors into wine,
right?
And ends up kind of letting it breathe and sort of develop, which are some of these characters in which certain wines need. So it ends up lending itself to the evolution of wine. I always call oak like salt on a steak. Right? It's like you need it. You know when there's too much, but you need it, right, to really bring out the flavors that are there.
Oh, that's so interesting. So a seasoning, and I think that makes a lot of sense. And so let's jump into the kind of characteristics or the things that impact what oak brings to wine. And in my head, I have it as there's the source of the oak. You mentioned a terroir. And main sources of oak for wine are where?
France, mostly, is where they come from. There's forests in Hungary, forests in Austria.
Right.
The United States as well is starting to have some really fun oak sources pop up, which I'm sure we'll go into in a little bit.
Yeah.
Those are kind of the main oak forests that we see in wine production.
And so when you think about that, the reason that's important is the weather patterns, the temperatures from winter to summer, the humidity, and probably the whole sort of just forest microbes are all different. So you're going to get different characteristics in the wine.
Absolutely. And even the age of the forest is something that we look at super, super in depth, because that dictates the rate of evolution that it undergoes in the wine.
So here's what it might look like coming from, let me get to this one, what it might look like, the trees might look like coming from the forest. So 80 to 100-year-old trees typically, but do you go for older than that, or?
That's about average.
Yeah. Okay. And then those, though, happened to be being harvested in Texas.
Yeah.
And speaking of terroir, so we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But this, I got exposed to the idea of Texas oak recently, just a little bit before. In the middle of June, I went to do a video shoot in the Texas Hill Country and discovered this winery, thanks to Ray Isle from Food and Wine Magazine,
Nice.
that is using Texas oak. So we'll get more into that, but that is by my way of reminding you to subscribe to the YouTube channel.
Nice.
And the reason I want you to do that is so that you will be reminded when these shows come on. And I'm mentioning it because Texas is near and dear to my heart, so I'm hoping all the Texans out there will especially support me. It was my first ever vinifera wine, was a Chenin Blanc from Texas.
That sounds like an awesome first wine to hop into.
It was pretty good,
Yeah.
and I think a great choice for Texas to grow because it holds its acid and Texas is hot, that's for darn sure. So then another characteristic that impacts the wine is, of course, the techniques used to handle the oak, right?
Yeah.
So we've got things like weathering or seasoning,
Yep.
and then we have toast.
Yes.
So can you talk about what does the weathering do?
Yeah, so basically in that picture that you just shown, right, all these trees are chopped down. They end up getting milled into staves, so really like workable pieces. If you see in Home Depot, it kind of look like that, like regular 2x4s. From then, they just get laid out in a yard in big stacks with
Got a picture
kind
of
of
that we can
staves.
look at.
Yeah, that's exactly it, with staves in between. And basically what this does is it takes it from like what you think of as like a popsicle stick, where it's kind of woody and splintery,
Right.
and it ends up leaching out kind of all of those really sort of really hearty, woody sort of tannins. It ends up kind of softening naturally.
Right.
So it starts leaching out all of those things that we look for in wine, which are texture and sweetness and sort of spice from there on out, and makes it more accessible for that wine and wood interaction.
And that's one of the things that makes an oak barrel expensive, right? Because that takes time.
4 years some of our barrels are up to 5 years old.
Wow.
I think 2 to 3 is about the average, but that is a huge amount of time to house that much wood.
Right, just to be waiting for it to be ready. It's
Yeah.
sort of like having the wine in your cellar. Before you ever got
Yeah.
it to your cellar, you had the oak that had to be aged to contribute its
Yeah.
best quality to the wine. So, and then we talk about toasting. And I think once people get their heads around the idea that anytime you toast something, you caramelize it and make it taste different and
Yep.
usually better or sweeter. Whether that's a piece of white bread, it goes from being kind of
Yep.
boring to being pretty good, or a marshmallow goes from being
Yeah.
sugary to being caramely and yummy. So talk
Excited for
about
some s'mores.
toasting, because
Yeah.
if you don't toast at all versus if you toast heavy, like what is that going to do for us?
Yeah, and it's so interesting these days. So when I first entered the industry, which was looking at barrels very early on, this would have been in 2013, 2014, was first exposed to like one of those oak catalogs. There was a light,
man.
a medium, and a heavy.
Right?
And that was just it across most cooperages. And now you see these like really high-end, almost like books that all the coopers give out. And there's light long plus plus, medium minus, long toast, and they have all of these like very artistic names to
It's
the
like
toast
salt.
that they end
It's
up
like
giving.
salt to the chef. They can get the pink and the gray and all these different
exactly,
things,
all
right?
the Malden salts. But
Yeah.
essentially, every house or every cooperage has their sort of has their protocols for how long and what defines their
Right.
toasts, which is basically length under a fire. So
Okay.
light toast barrels are just a couple minutes, medium toast where you end up getting more char, that's
Right.
getting closer in the 10s. And then there's heavier toast where you're trying to really impart those smoky, kind of more charred characteristics, and that's sitting much longer than that.
And that's what it looks like right there. I just gave an image of the oak
yeah.
barrel being toasted so people can kind of get a sense what that looks like.
Yeah.
And I've seen like if you're a whiskey drinker, especially like bourbon,
Yep.
it's classically heavily charred American oak is like I think legally required for bourbon. So
Yep.
they go the extreme, right? And you can think about it that way. When you smell bourbon, it has a really assertively
Yep.
sweet smell to it, and that a lot of that comes from the oak. So
Yeah.
so the toasting is another big deal. And then we also talk about the age of the oak, right?
Yes.
How many times it's been used. Can you talk a little bit about that and what we're trading off there?
Yeah, sorry, not to step back a second, but I
Please.
just had like a in the kitchen moment. So
I like
one
it.
of the things that keeps this winery running is our espresso machine, and our cellar team and myself are very particular about our beans. So
Coffee.
the toasting of barrels is very, very similar to the toasting
Right.
of beans that you like for your coffee.
Okay.
So when you think of light toast, right, you have those more acidic, more floral tones. And then when you go like real heavy, think about like the worst diner that you've ever been to,
Right.
and it tastes
Or that
like
corner kiosk on New York City 50th and like
Yeah,
in
exactly.
Avenue of the Americas, and you're like, oh gosh.
Yeah, where you have like the darkest, it tastes like you're drinking a cup of mud,
Yeah.
burnt,
Yeah.
chocolatey, like that sort of thing. That's probably the best, most like synonymous thing to the way that oak and wood is toasted.
Yeah.
It's the same way that coffee beans are roasted and that flavor profile that they end up letting out.
That's a great analogy. In the same trajectory, you're talking about how it used to be kind of 3 sizes fits all,
Yeah.
and now there's so many choices. And the same thing with coffee. Like we get really like granular on our coffee, and but that's because it makes such a difference in the taste.
Yeah.
So that's a great analogy.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you did that. So back to size though. What is wait? Did we already do age? We didn't do age.
Yeah.
Age. What are we? And actually, James is asking, are the barrels reused? That's a pretty good segue into the answer about oak, about the age of the barrel. So explain that to us.
Yeah, so aging, there's age before it hits the winery, which is kind of 2 years on average, up to 5 years at the most, as I've seen.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah, and most cooperages don't offer it because as you let it sit in the field longer, it gets much more fragile and delicate. So you get barrels get much more expensive at 5 years. But that time out in the field before they get made into barrels is really sort of dealing with integration. So all those flavors get sort of more toned down. They end up getting more integrated into the wood. They're not as puffy and not as showy. And they end up kind of stepping in and making more of like a background sort of noise where they're just really sort of elegant, really integrated with the wine.
Gotcha.
And then once they end up hitting the winery and first use, that's what we call new French oak. That's what it means if you see that on wine descriptions.
Here's some of the, in your cave actually, which is very beautiful, some of your barriques. That's what you might, the smaller barrels would be the ones where you usually talk about first use or second use. And then here's like a wall of, let me get rid of that one. Hold on, let me see if I can do that right. Then here is wait, hold on. New barrels right there, brand new, and some of them still have the plastic on them. So so first use, talk about what that means for us.
Yeah, so basically thinking about barrels with the impact that they have on wine, they end up imparting more flavor that first year. So like the flavor from the wood, which is more of that sort of roasty, it can be more chocolatey, some of that more sweet character. So that sucrosity is kind of a word, like that sweetness that people like. It gets imparted that first year. Second year, it's about 50% off of that. Third year, you might just get a little trace of that oak and sort of warmness from the wood. And then beyond that, they're kind of falling back into how they were used originally, which is more as a vessel to be able to hold wine.
Right.
The thing that stays consistent throughout their entire time in barrel is the amount of oxygen that they let in because the wood's porous, right? So like élevage, the aging of wine in the cellar will always continue regardless of age, but it's that flavor impact that's the highest the first year, and then a little more in the background after that.
And that's part of that slow, very micro-oxygenation through the pores of the wood, that's also kind of overall sort of harmonizing the wine and bringing things together?
Yeah, so all wine needs a little bit of air to be able to, kind of reach this place where it's like settled within itself.
Yeah.
On the opposite side of that spectrum would be like a Vino Verde or a Chicote, where it's like fresh and there's no air and it's just bubbling out of the glass sort of thing, versus once you get into like the Cabernets, which have been aging for 2 years in wood and maybe another couple years in bottle, where they get all that oxygen integration to be able to be enjoyed.
Right, and there are some styles of wine where they want oak, but not any new oak. And so here's a picture of a sherry bodega in Spain.
Yeah.
This is Bodegas Lustau.
It's a gorgeous,
those are probably like
gorgeous
80-year-old barrels.
Yeah.
And what they do if they start to leak is they just repair them. They are not about to get rid of those barrels unless they get paid a lot of money by a Scotch whiskey producer, because a lot of Scotch whiskey producers like to use sherry barrels, sometimes port and other barrels to age their whiskeys in. But that's like the most circular economy you can imagine, right? Because they use them for a long time, and then they get that sherry character, and then it's off to the whiskey houses. So, but a lot of the sherry producers just don't sell them. They want their old barrels forever if they can. So all right. So we've covered the source.
Yep.
We've covered the techniques of weathering, or seasoning is what a lot of people call it.
Yeah.
The toasting, we've covered the size, and we've covered the age of the barrels.
Yep.
So let's jump into the wine here. We've got your Chardonnay, and when you were doing oak trials, and Chris says he loves the conversation going from trees to barrels, always been fascinated by the process. And so James, to your question, yes, the barrels do get reused.
Yep.
Not as often here in styles like this, or not as many times, but so talk about this wine. What were the oak trials? Where are you at with them? What did you learn? And what's going on with this one, which smells like creme brulee and a little bit pound cake, and then just a lot of beautiful, like baked pear, kind of quincy, and a little bit maybe of graham cracker crust.
Yeah.
So nice.
Yeah, so here at Knightsbridge Winery, everything we do is organically farmed out on the property. And we end up taking, knuckles for that.
Thank you.
And what we end up doing is we end up having all of these special pieces on our property that we want to give light to and make personalities out of. Whenever I talk to people, I kind of talk about like the crew system, right? We have these different crews within our vineyard. It's all of the Knights Valley, but we end up giving these light. This is called our East Block Chardonnay. There's a picture.
We've got the label for you, the bottle prepared. Actually, but yeah.
And this wine is one of our smaller production wines that we have, and also one that's available at the winery almost exclusively. This comes from one of the smaller, coldest blocks on the property.
Okay.
And so this block in particular, like you were saying, it's got some really fun kind of spice and floral notes. And when I ended up taking over, I wanted to always learn. That's something that I bring to the table all the time. I always ask questions to other winemakers. I'm always very interested in what the cooperages have to say. And so when I first tasted this wine and tasted it here, I was like, this is such a special clone and such a special block. Like, it has such a unique flavor profile. How do we accent that, right? Like, how do we bring out the flavors that it naturally has? So what we ended up doing is taking 2 different barrel trials. So where we end up buying a couple different cooperages, a couple different toasts. We end up inviting winemaker, friends, trade, somms, and everybody just to be able to share our learnings with people, right? To be able to taste and see collectively as well as singularly what barrels act the best with this wine.
Right.
And so the process is never over for learning, but this wine is really fun because the barrel profile has changed significantly due to those barrel trials. That's why I wanted to bring it in.
That's awesome.
So basically, when we had 5 cooperages going towards this wine for our first trial in maybe 2019, now we've narrowed it down to 1 single cooper.
Wow.
Where it's just like, this cooper and this block
spot.
is just such a synergy together.
Goldilocks, right?
Yeah, exactly. So we've ended up dealing with Ramon as the cooperage we use on this, which just brings out some of those more like graham crackery, baking spice, orange flower notes that you said you were getting earlier.
Yeah.
And just like pairs with this wine so beautifully. It has such an expansive sort of palate as well.
And I failed to bring what I was going to bring for this wine. So your homework assignment is you go to Sunshine Foods and you get Euphoria Cheese if you haven't already had it.
Okay.
That is the perfect pairing for this style of Chardonnay. It's a sheep's milk aged Gouda style. It's Gouda is how we all say it, but then some cheesemonger once corrected me and
Oh, wow.
I had my pronunciation corrected. You're not supposed to do it as a sommelier. You're not supposed to correct this pronunciation of the wine customer. But I was actually really happy to learn how the Dutch would say it. But if you say Gouda, nobody knows what you're saying. They think howdy,
Yeah.
Anyway, but you got to try that cheese with this wine. It is absolutely crazy good. That is absolutely delicious, and I'm curious because it has a really beautiful acid and a really beautiful elegance. It feels to me like it's a wine that would improve in the cellar for 10 years and really evolve. What do you think?
Yeah, so that's the idea for Chardonnay here, is we're trying to be kind of this like microphone for Knights Valley, which is in turn a microphone for California.
Right.
Being able to have these wines that have acid that hold up, that have kind of restrained oak use that just keeps kind of evolving over the time that it's seen, and using some techniques in the winemaking that end up letting it evolve over those years. And that's the idea, is trying to get California back on, continually known as world-renowned for Chardonnay.
Yeah, that's super special. And I'm glad that you mentioned it the way you did, because the other thing that's interesting about Chardonnay and why we often explore oak with it is as a grape variety, it's very winemaking driven. You can have Chardonnay that is no oak at all. You can have Chardonnay that is all on the spectrum of different oak options. You can have Chardonnay that is turned into a sparkling wine, Blanc de Blanc, champagne, and other wines that are made like that. And I think they're even doing floor-based Chardonnays in the Jura in France. Like it's a chameleon to technique. So I think the kind of work that you've done is probably really important work.
Yeah, it's really fun to be able to guide what is naturally given in the vineyard, right? To be able, here it's more about like, okay, how do we bring the estate forward? And Chardonnay is that vessel. So like, how do we start to peel back some of those winemaking techniques and use them just in enough moderation so that they accent the wine, they amplify the wine, what's already there,
it's
and
just
are able
opening
to
up more and more with air too. So that's the other thing is that people should realize is that a great Chardonnay probably is going to evolve over time in the glass. So get it into the glass, into a nice sizable one, and play with it, because you'll be pleasantly surprised. And I think most people don't think that.
Oh yeah. And Chardonnay, like you were saying earlier, is one of those things where it's like, if you don't like it, that just means you haven't had one that you like yet, because there so many. I think Chardonnay might be the metering stick for the world's greatness of wine a little bit.
That's true.
Right, every country makes it in this world, so
yes, that's
who makes
true.
The best one?
And they need to have a good foot forward with it, because it is really one of those classics. So speaking of a classic style, but very different to Chardonnay, we're now going to the Clos du Temple, which is a rosé, and although this one is so pale in color, you can imagine that it's probably from the south of France, which it is, because it's become very, very trendy to make rosé with very little color. And you can see the bottle shape is the shape of a temple. This is Gerard Bertrand. Speaking of organic, and he's got a big commitment to different sustainability practices, like you guys do. And this is an estate that's just devoted to rosé, and I wanted to show it because it's 100% new French oak, but almost no toast. I think maybe no toast, and only 6 months. And then they spend all that time, they put it on what are called the lees. Can you just tell us about lees and why we should care?
Yes.
In the entry level student that we are.
Yeah, of course. Okay.
Oh my God, that smells really good.
Yeah, it's a super fun, super interesting wine. So lees, L-E-E-S, that is basically when yeast make wine, they turn all these sugar into alcohol and end up basically taking all of these byproducts to make these flavors and aromas, which is why we love it. It's a living, sort of breathing thing. Yeah. And once the alcohol gets to a point, and once there's no more sugar, there's nothing else for them to eat in the wine, once their job is done, at least in the living form, they end up just going to the bottom of whatever container that they're in. So all of these lees sort of settle out at the bottom, and basically what they do is they start to let out all of their, it sounds kind of gross, they basically let out their innards, so they end up sort of lysing and sort of basically breaking down in the wine. And what this does is it just draws out texture. It adds some, if you've ever made bread at home, right? Some more like bready, yeasty, boulangerie, bakery sort of notes to the wine.
But
and just
no fat and no sugar.
No fat and no sugar, exactly. And it just kind of draws out and adds texture, adds kind of a warming note to the wines. And I think that this is a really fun example of that.
I mean, and I'm even smelling that. I'm smelling that kind of pretty like bread dough or freshly baked white bread. smell, and the texture is where I'm mostly getting it too. It's just giving a lot of creaminess.
Yeah.
So you get, it's got a similar textural creaminess to the Chardonnay, but it doesn't have that baking spice piece because I guess the oak is not toasted, and it's also a short amount of time, 6 months.
Yeah, so we end up doing closer to 12, so a full year for all of our Chardonnays, which is obviously twice the time that they use this. And then we end up doing similar things with light longs. We don't do any untoasted barrels for Chardonnay, and we creep into medium toast from time to time because Chardonnay kind of lends to that a little bit better. Rosé is one of those varieties or one of those wines where it's just you want the fruit to drive the equation,
100%.
and I think they do a really fun job sort of framing the texture on this.
I feel like you're right. I feel like they got that right on the nose, and so it's a delicious rosé, but it with a lot of the refreshment that you're looking for with rosé, but it's just a little more serious. And I would say it's a lot more serious in price. But I also think that, and there are quite a few from southern France now that are over $100 and kind of using some of these intensive techniques and really, really focusing on the quality. And I always thought, gosh, I just don't know. Rosé, can it really be that good or that worth it? But when I've had them given to me blind, I've said to myself, ooh, I really notice the quality difference. Do I think I want to pay over $100 for rosé? Maybe not. I might choose a different category.
Yeah, I haven't been convinced
for that.
yet.
But nevertheless, if somebody else is paying, go for it, right?
Yeah.
And I've got somebody here saying they drank a bunch of it in Florence, Madrid, and Barcelona. So there you go.
That's a great place to drink rosé.
You probably got a good deal there too. Okay, so that was super fun. Now we're going to go to kind of more traditional approach to oak in wine and oak terroir. You mentioned it at the very beginning, and I think that this is an important topic. And I was interested to try this wine. It is a classic. I think it's probably, a denizen of almost every steakhouse wine list in the country because it's it's just widely available and it always ages well, but it drinks. Oh, we're on the cowboy. Sorry. Okay, I got my notes, but terroir, oak terroir. We will get to the silver oak in a second. This is super fun. I showed you the Texas oak being harvested. This is an interesting one because it's of course American oak, but it's specifically Texas oak. Now this wine is called Cowboy Cuvée. Let me show you the label here. It is, where is my Cowboy Cuvée label? I'll find it in a second. I'll grab the bottle in the meantime. So this is Bending Branch Winery, and they are in the Texas Hill Country. So just a real quick shout out to our Hill Country friends who have been through it. We see floods and fires here in Napa Valley, so we feel you, and we think about you, and we're so glad that you're on a path back. But this is a Bending Branch Winery, Dr. Bob Young, and he got really curious about the idea of oak terroir and the idea that there is white oak, which is the type of oak that's grown in the U.S., different species to the oak grown in France, in Texas. And most of the American oak that we use in wine is from what? Missouri, Pennsylvania, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so we have Missouri, Pennsylvania, and I want to say there's one Mississippi as well.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
Yeah,
so center of the country where you have continental climate, really hot summers, really cold winters. So the oak, the trees are really put into climates that make them, very tight grained, which is what you want for wine. So Dr. Bob wanted to explore, could Texas white oak be a good thing to use? So he had some chains made by Interstave out here, which is a company that produces oak adjuncts and alternatives to the cask. And they finished these blends with about 4 months of Texas white oak chain. And it won a double gold at the San Francisco Chronicle Wine Competition, and they are so excited about the results that they are actually weathering staves of Texas white oak in their
so cool.
on their property right now.
So cool.
And a cooperage is being built in Texas. So they get Texas terroir, and they don't have to ship the barrels very far, so there's a lot good about that. And the other thing that's cool about American oak is it can be quarter sawn rather than split, so you get a more yield out of it, which makes the barrels less expensive. So this is about a $50 wine, which is, you know, pretty affordable by today's standards, right?
Yeah, and I was gonna say, I feel like anything that draws back to sense of place is just such a cool thing. Like that idea of hyper-local, doing the wine next to the forest that's being sourced, right? That's such a cool idea.
Yes.
And that's like, right, that's that chef sort of idea where all the cuisine and all the wine and all the things that are in the region naturally kind of go with each other, right? There's naturally a pairing there because they're already in that same climate. I think it's a beautiful expression.
Well, to take it to that extreme, when I was visiting there, they had the guys from Arrowhead Ranch bring some antelope, and so we had antelope skewers with this wine, and it was outrageous.
That is a very Texas experience.
It was a Texas terroir experience to the max, and I'll never forget it. And I'm super excited about it because I think it's a fun direction for that. And similarly, speaking of oak terroir, let's get to our next wine. We're going to do the Silver Oak Alexander Valley. And this is another one that those of you who know Silver Oak, you know that they are known for their use of American oak exclusively since the beginning, which was in 1972. And but about, I think it's over 10 years ago now, they bought the cooperage that they were sourcing oak from. It's in Higbee, Missouri. And so that they were able to kind of control a lot of aspects of it, and they've also bought some forest, so they're able to, you know, really pick the trees that they want, and began a lot of experimentation with weathering, times, toast levels, and so on. And so, wow, it's a pretty lovely smelling wine.
Yeah, I definitely feel like they are the heroes for American oak, especially in this valley.
Yes.
They're well known for that across just about, like you're saying, this wine is in a lot of good places and has that really strong sort of representation for what American oak does for wines in Alexander Valley and Napa Valley and different things like that.
Yeah, I feel like it's really showing a lot of sweet spice like clove and nutmeg and things that are very expressive and bumping up the red fruit, which I think is nice because a lot of times when we taste California Cabernets, whether that's Sonoma County or Napa, where I think within the state are you know, really our leading lights on Cabernet of quality and of concentration and of terroir, where you smell it, you taste it, you can make a pretty good guess of where it's from. And that's saying a lot because we haven't been around that long.
Yeah, that's.
And I love that. But this one is really juicy, but also very it's got a lot of tannin and a lot of grip, and I feel like, well, they're known for aging. You know, that's the beauty of it, is that they age really well over time.
Yeah, just like you're saying, that like American oak, in my experiences, like you're saying, just like leans so much into that sort of like spiced drawer characteristic that you end up getting.
Yeah.
Not as far as like whiskey goes, of course, but like has some cinnamons or some synonymous nature there where it ends up leaning into that spice drawer. Baking spices quite a bit.
Absolutely. And James is asking the retail price, and I didn't look it up, but I think it's about $85, folks. Somebody here is going to look it up in the room. We haven't lost everybody yet because they're able to taste along with us. So far so good, folks.
Yeah, doing well.
some delicious wines here. It's not a bad day at the office.
$80.
$80. So $80. That's you know, that's a gift for this level of quality, to be honest. I think it's really, really, really delivers a lot. This one, it's 24 months in American oak, of which 50% is new, and 50% is once used. So talking about the amount of time, which I didn't even mention, the amount of time in oak.
Yes.
We didn't talk about that. I left that out of my characteristics. So is more time in oak, does that necessarily mean the wine is more oaky? How does that work?
Oh, that's a great question. I feel like most things in winemaking are it depends. In oak, what you end up seeing is waves. So things kind of come and go, right? Like it's an interaction between wine and wood. And sometimes they are loving on each other.
Right.
And other times they are like at the walls sort of thing, like driving against each other.
Sounds like a couple, right?
Yeah, exactly.
They get married, but they have their moments.
Yeah, and then they always come around for the happy end. But it's unbelievable to see how these wines progress over the years, where maybe after the first, especially in Cabernet, maybe after the first 6 months, you're kind of like, oh, these barrels and wines, like, what did I do, sort of thing.
And you're sitting there, like, going home and going, I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. And then 12 months, they start to argue. They start to come together a little bit more. You start to see, like, oh, okay, it's kind of developing in that way. 14 months, they're back up against the wall. And then kind of at that 18-month period, which is, we use only French oak in our wines, but that's kind of when they start to meld together. Once that integration happens, once that élevage sort of happens, they end up really just kind of sinking in together. And really, I like to call them kids. They end up going through puberty, right? And then they become adults. They lose their acne. Their head isn't bigger than their body. They're not as angry anymore.
Churlish.
Yeah, exactly. And they finally come around towards the end.
Right, and then you can have a conversation with them over a long dinner, and really, that's a great analogy.
Yeah, and all different barrels and forests and different aging, they all kind of come around at different times too. So it's a barrel by barrel basis.
Gosh, and you get one chance a year to sort of play with that, and then you have to wait all that time to figure out where it's going, and then you have to wait even longer, with it in the cellar to see where's it really going. I mean, the truth is that most Americans drink the wine, what's the joke, within 22 minutes, the amount of time it takes to get it home from the store and open. But those of us who have had the chance to taste an older wine, we have that moment where we go, oh gosh, if you can make it happen, it is so worth it, right?
Absolutely.
Or just hang out with the right people that have a cellar.
That have the older ones.
Befriend the right people. So talk about this wine. I put it up on the screen, and this is, the bottling is your straight Knights Valley.
This is our Knights Valley Estate Cab. This is our flagship wine, so a wine that we've been making. And Jim and Kelly have been around for this since 2006.
Oh, nice.
And this is what we've considered kind of like the voice of our vineyard.
So next year is 20 years of this wine.
That's a very good point. We'll have to.
Oh my goodness.
I'll start doing the pre-orders for champagne here very soon.
That's exciting.
But yeah, this is one of my favorite wines to taste in current and back vintages, because you just get to see what the estate gives from year to year, right? Because it's the same vines, it's the same dirt that goes into it. And really, it's been fun to run those trials. We invited you out for white wine Chardonnay, which is really, really fun. We saved the red wine trials for winemakers because it's pretty tough to get through a day full of Cabernet.
I totally get it, and I think that I'll just take your word for it.
Yeah, and our winemaking team, we taste through every single barrel that we have in the cellar, and it takes about 2 weeks. We have to pace ourselves out. But the best thing about this wine and kind of how it relates back to oak, why I wanted to taste it, is for me, oak is from the dirt up. So we have 5 different soil types on this property.
Wow. Which
is really cool. We go from 400 to 14 feet elevation here. We're kind of like a fan from northeast to true west facing.
Wow.
So all these different exposures, all these different soil types, and you could actually see them right there, which is fun.
Yeah, that's cool.
And each of those soils ends up giving different sort of structure and different sort of characteristics to the wine, really like French, like the terroir defines the wine sort of approach. And so what we've learned over all of those trials, right, is that we match barrels and we kind of match these forests with the soil type and what it gives. So this is all of it coming together, and hopefully you can see it's got front, middle, back, and all these different pieces of our vineyard kind of contribute to that. Our true west-facing stuff lots of sort of front palate. So we end up needing to build out the back. We need to build up some structure on that because it has a little more exposure. A lot of that middle and back comes from the center of our property, which is like that Goldilocks, kind of like that clay brown soil that you see. My personal favorite block that we have.
I got to get the soil. I'm getting the soil.
We'll get the soil. We'll get the dirt.
This one?
Exactly.
Is this the Goldilocks?
Yes, that's the favorite one.
Goldilocks dirt, y'all, right here. Just showing you. Like, this is serious.
Yeah, so that's all volcanic soil, which is really cool. And this was a fun project that we ended up taking on.
Wow. Yeah, because we have a huge volcano. We hope it's extinct.
Yep,
it's technically not, right? Oh, is it 10,000 years? Okay.
It is a volcanic field that is no longer active, which doesn't mean that it can't become active again.
Got it. Okay.
But no. Yeah, we don't need that coming into harvest.
Yeah.
no volcano eruptions.
Knock wood.
Yeah, knock wood on that one.
Yes.
But this one is like the complete opposite of that other side of the property where it has so much shoulders and so much tannin that it really needs sort of rounding and softening out. So it's just fun to be able to have all of these pieces and look at them from the property out, right? That's what defines our wood choices for this Cabernet specifically. So it's kind of like making 4 different wines and then blending them all back together and making those oak choices accordingly.
So what is the amount of time in oak, and is it all new? Like what
Yeah, that's a great question. So we end up doing as just kind of like anywhere from 60 to 75% new French oak.
Okay.
The rest would be basically first and second use, so a couple years back. And then we end up doing about 18 to 22 months. So in a vintage like 22, which is a little bit warmer, that's when we end up coming off of the oak a little bit sooner because it doesn't need as much time to sort of let go of the tannins versus a year like maybe 21, which is a drought year and a really tight fruit and really, really hardy, just wines that'll last forever. We end up aging that a little bit longer just to kind of let it let go some more.
This is just going and going and going. Like this is definitely having a conversation that's evolving over just the time that we've been talking and had it poured. When I first put my nose in the glass, it smelled like tobacco, and when I say that, I don't mean tobacco like an old wine. I mean like sweet pipe tobacco, or I don't really have a reference point for that, but like my grandfather had chaw, right? So like Red Man and in a pouch.
Yeah.
And you'd smell it, and it smelled so sweet and appealing. And I remember once like sticking some in my mouth and throwing up because whoa, it is really not something that that comes across the way that it smells. But the smell was fantastic. Now it's completely different. Then I went to the sweet spices. Now I'm almost to a floral like lily thing that's really popping out. And then in the palate, it has this gorgeous juiciness to it and liveliness, and like the tannin, like the Europeans would say like crunchy tannin. Like it's not big and bruisey.
Yeah.
It's got lots, but it's lively. It's like kind of dancing on your tongue rather than just being like, punching it.
Yeah, and that's really what we go for. This wine, which is 2022, this is a little early on to drink, but I figured we're both professionals here. Could talk
I'm okay with it.
Yeah, exactly. Could talk to the oak profile very well on this one. And that's kind of classic Knights Valley, Knightsbridge, our vineyard in general, since we have a little more shade compared to other people out here.
Right.
We end up getting that, like, I'm not going to say a foot in Bordeaux because that's too much, but maybe like a pinky toe or two in Bordeaux, where you end up getting sort of a little more acid, a little more sort of, like you said, some angular tannin to it, maybe gravelly tannin. And then that kind of like savory edge to it, which is just so classic. You can kind of smell the vineyard in these wines.
Yeah, and where it's not like so kind of that overripe or raisiny, or almost like the word I use is gooey when they're just like a little too overripe. And this is sorry, no, but that's not what this is. Like I just think when people get too excited about either a lot of oak or a lot of ripeness, it kind of can go too far.
Oh, absolutely.
And everyone, we all know that, right? We've all had like a strawberry that we were like, oh darn, it's overripe or it's tired. Like at peak is exactly what you want to capture.
You want to capture right here. We try to capture things on the way up in the vineyard.
That.
When things are going, you never want to capture something. You never want to harvest
on the
it
downside.
on the downside.
Yeah.
Always on the upward slope, so that it once it comes in the cellar, you have to imagine that it's still going up that curve.
Right. Oh, that's cool. So
Yeah.
I love that. All right. So we're wrapping this up though with a wine that has no oak at all. And it is a wine that I think anyone would consider to be a serious red with collectible cellar potential. And this is a Malbec, high-grown Malbec from Argentina, specifically from the Uco Valley in a single village called Paraje Altamira. Let me show you that really quickly. It is a wine from Familia Zuccardi. And the interesting thing about it and why I chose it is because this is a single grape and it is a Bordeaux variety, right? Malbec is a classic Bordeaux variety.
Yeah.
And so when we think of Bordeaux varieties, we think of aging them in small barrels, right? And that's how pretty much the industry started in Argentina when they began to produce wine that was worthy of export. It's been
delicious.
A big wine country for a long time, but they weren't producing wines at export quality until, frankly, French and Californian winemakers kind of went there and said, "Hey, you've got the terroir. Let's go ahead and leverage it." And I don't mean that they weren't already thinking that, but it was this brain trust, like we have here. We have a brain trust of Americans and French and people and everyone working together, where there's a good potential terroir.
Yeah.
Let's all collaborate and figure out how to make the most of it in our lifetime, right? As opposed to taking 1,000 years the way the Burgundians had to do, because they couldn't, travel all the time. It was the monks doing it and taking great notes and keeping good records, doing all the research. Now we can travel at the speed of sound almost.
Speed of the internet.
At speed of the internet, and we can get together and do this quicker, and share the wealth. So this is but the reason I brought it up is because they've gone away from oak. Lots of Malbecs in Argentina are and were and still are classically vinified, aged in French barrels. Mm-hmm. They've gone away from it and using strictly concrete, and I know you're a fan of concrete.
Love concrete.
This is what their tank room looks like. You talked about tulips. I think it's similar to some of the shapes that you guys are is a little bit different.
Yeah.
But the idea is that you get micro-oxygenation, but less than on a barrel, is what Sebastian Zuccardi tells me. And then he does point out that the stone and sand and water used for the tanks are local, so maybe there's a little bit of local terroir in the vessel as well. But I just think it's really interesting that essentially the idea here is they're treating it almost like a Burgundy or a Riesling, going for terroir transparency in one grape, rather than treating it like a Bordeaux and putting that extra coating of winemaking on it. What do you think?
I love this wine. It is so, wines that are singular are so special, right? Because you're like, I've never had something like this before. And I think they're doing, the producer, and you could tell me if it's of the region or this is common, but I've never had a Mendoza Malbec that tastes quite this sort of earthy and mineral driven and sort of grainy. It's a really, really savory wine. Malbec has such a fun way of going reductive. That's always the first wine in the cellar to stink up a little bit.
Right, and everyone's like, oh no, what's going on?
And when that's captured at the perfect point, it leads to so much complexity, which I think this wine has it just in loads of.
Yeah, and I found as I was tasting them the other day that the longer I left it in the glass, it's sort of like the Cabernet, your Cabernet, your Knights Valley flagship, that it just kept opening and opening and opening. And so I was trying really hard not to keep drinking it and just let it sit and keep smelling it, because there's no harm in that, and there's a lot of excitement that you can sort of behold. Because now it's getting, like you said, savory spice, but there's also coming in almost a little bit of a gamey note.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I got some Northern Rhone Syrah stuff, some Salumaria stuff going on, which is such a very engaging wine. And I think concrete what's really cool is similar to like different forest selections where they let in different amounts of oxygen and have tighter and looser grain.
Yeah.
It's becoming such a popular vessel that they have different levels and different makeups of concrete, and which have different levels of oxygen that they let in now, which is really, really interesting. The Italians are leading the way on that, of concrete that lets in more or less air, kind of depending on what you want out of the style of wine, which is really cool.
Wow.
Yeah, and this, one thing that concrete always imparts, we use it for white wines here, we'll use it for reds down the line, just so much mid-palate sort of softness and width. That's really what I get on this wine. Like, it's got big tannins, it's like a 22, but that mid-palate is already so drawn out on it.
Yeah. Well, it's very, it's just interesting to me, and I just wanted to point it out to people that there's not a recipe for a great red wine or any wine that maybe has a lot of expression and has the potential to age, but also has a lot to say in its youth. So I think it's just fun for there to be so many different expressions, and also just like that where we're at with all we know. And people like you are like, no, I don't know enough. I gotta keep going. I gotta keep figuring this out and exploring this. So it's been really fun for us to be able to take advantage of all of that curiosity and expertise. Yeah. So what's next for you mentioned concrete maybe for reds in the future, but and I just tasted, you didn't get to taste this with me, but their Sauvignon Blanc.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, woo! I love Sauvignon Blanc, and I love Sauvignon Blanc from this part of the world. And I think maybe Sonoma County and a little bit Napa Valley, but more Sonoma County Sauvignon Blanc probably is the best. Now, this is just me.
Let's go.
That doesn't mean it is the best.
You heard it here first.
My opinion, my preference, because I just feel like there's just a lot we've learned and a lot of complexity now. And yours was really fragrant. And then textured. And we don't expect that sometimes.
That's what we try to leave with here, is balance and texture in the wines. And I think that's what's up next here, is just how do we better refine these wines, and how do we keep going? Like, we have this bottom bar of greatness, and then how do we keep going, right? Large barrels are the newest rendition of that. We're getting lots of 500 liters barrels, which are twice the size of the standard barrique.
So we think we know oak. We don't.
So we're going to do a whole nother round of trials coming up here soon. And just leading with curiosity. I think that while we love and respect the wines, you've never made it in wine, and that's the beautiful thing about it, is there's always something to learn. There's always a way to get better, which is the beautiful piece.
Oh, and that's like life, right? We never know everything. We don't even know what we don't know. And so it's best to be what do they say? Beginner's mind is the Eastern philosophy piece of it. That just makes it fun. As long as I think that's why I left investment banking. I was like, this is kind of straightforward. And I would rather not know what's coming next. Yeah, and people say, like, wine is so intimidating. I'm like, no, I'll never get bored.
Yeah, that's true. The more you know, the less you know.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And you don't have to know anything, because it's just all the information's there and people want to share it. So that's why we're here. We're really delighted that you joined us. Thank you so much. Derek, thank you so much. Thank you to the Knightsbridge team, to Jim and Kelly Bailey, and all the wonderful guests who are their closest friends and family members who joined us here to taste along. And I can't wait to hear what they think. But love to have you with us. And oops, or maybe somebody's playing it. That's okay. Somebody is watching the
live
video,
stream,
the live stream.
We're live streaming.
Yeah, well, I should have put a graphic up so you would like it more. But anyway, I did want to just mention that the next episode, this is really cool actually. The next episode will be about, I'm calling it's on September 10th. At 5:30, also live on YouTube and LinkedIn and Facebook if you've been watching from there, and I know many of you have. But weeknight wine and food pairing. We're in back to school mode. We're in back to work mode. Vacations mode is over. And weeknights are no reason to beg off of wine and food pairing. You just have to make it fast, easy, yummy, and bargainy, as I said in my little graphic there. So I hope you'll join us, and we'll be doing some polls on Instagram to find out like what weeknight foods are your go-tos that maybe we could recommend some wines for. So lightning round for you before we wrap up.
Yeah.
What are your weeknight go-to meals? And then you don't have to say a particular wine, but like what do you put together?
So
for the quicks.
One of my favorite weeknight meals that me and my partner have been having is, we call it like a poor man's sushi roll. So we'll end up doing rice and all the veggies, and then you just end up getting a can of sustainably sourced tuna.
I like it. Okay.
There you go, hand and pull caught, right? And then basically you end up just dressing that up like you would any other like poke or sushi with like sriracha and mayo, and you could have such fun hand rolls right then and there. And then that paired with, let's see, what do we normally have in the fridge? We'll go Sonoma Sauvignon Blanc. Our Knightsbridge Sauvignon Blanc here is a wonderful pairing.
That's where I was, yeah. And then if you're really, really scraping the bottom of the barrel, like what I would do is dollar cost average, and you could do very high quality Chardonnay with popcorn.
Nice.
And like the popcorn's cheap. Make sure you get decent butter, but it's still going to be cheap. And then you can go for it on the wine. And then if you're feeling flush, you could do a little truffle salt. But that's a win. Maybe that's not quite a meal, but you could throw a salad at it and you're good.
Nice. Have a protein shake on the side.
Have a protein shake on the side.
You're flush.
Oh,
for
maybe
the day.
a little bit of Euphoria, just on the cheese, popcorn, and salad. You're good.
That's a complete diet.
That's a complete dinner for sure. All right. Thank you again, Derek. So wonderful to have you, and thanks to all of you for joining us. And we will see you the next time. And please take care of each other and take care of yourselves. And wine and conversation are what bind us all together. So keep it up.